We all need books for information, but the appetite for reading depends on human connection. A local author is trying to provide that in two ways through the Grandpops Young Readers series. It's a book about the contributions made by people of African descent, but also designed for connection between children and parents or grandparents. To tell us about the book and a signing event in Grove Hall is the author. She's also the executive producer for the TV series Urban Empowerment. I'd like to welcome Professor Deborah Shariff.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me, Chris.
Thank you very much for being with us, Deborah. I know that there's an interesting process about how you got to writing this book, but there's also some family history of yours that's behind it, too.
Absolutely. I think the motivation for actually putting this particular curriculum and storybook together started, well, not too long ago when I was a kid, but a long time ago when I used to sit around the table with my grandparents, and particularly my grandfather, who used to work for the railroad. And he was a Pullman porter, and he used to come home and tell me and my brother Ricky so many wonderful stories. So in dedication to him, that's how I named this particular curriculum, the Grandpops Young Readers series. But while I was sitting there at the table, there was so much information from my parents and from my grandparents about the fact that we were related to Native Americans. They talked about the Blackfoot, Pequot, Cherokee. And, you know, of course, as a child, I was, raised to respect my elders. Now, the confusing part is when I went to school, there was never any mention about that relationship or about the fact that Native Americans were around during the time when Africans were here in the early 16, 17, 1800s.
No, I think what's interesting here is not just that one group of people are related to another, it's what kind of life these people led and why. And I'm thinking, these are people maybe who are able to preserve their culture in a way that would not have been possible if they were in slavery.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the story, as a matter of fact, my thesis, I'm, an alum of Boston University, their film school, and one of the things that I had the awesome opportunity to do was to produce a thesis film based on Black Indians. And that gave me the opportunity to do a lot of research, Chris. And when I actually started reading this information, I said, oh my goodness, this is the information my grandparents told me so many years ago. So it was sort of like a natural sort of progression for me to think about while I was developing this curriculum. Let me also, mention and put together a historical approach so that students not only are they dealing with a reading and writing curriculum, but they also have the opportunity of reading about a part of history that has been forgotten.
Well, your ancestors sold you on the concept. Of course, the next step is you've got to sell the concept to the young ones. I mean, talk about that.
Well, I was the manager of the after-school program at the Urban League for a couple of years. And so I've already introduced the students to this concept. And they were sort of like, what, Ms. Shariff, are you serious? There were Native Americans we used to hook up. I mean, it was just amazing because it was something that students are not learning. They're not learning in school. So presenting that particular curriculum was not a hard task at all.
This is BNN News, and we're talking about the Grandpops Young Reader series with Deborah Shariff. Deborah, talk about the kind of book you got here. This is not just telling what happened historically, but this is about things that kids are going to be doing with their relatives.
Absolutely. Well, one of the things that just so I can tell you a synopsis of what the book is about, it starts off with a little girl, 9 years old, who has an unusual assignment from her teacher, Miss Nefertari. And Miss Nefertari, again, I'm dropping names that are significant in history. And she gives her fourth grade students this assignment that they have to find a forgotten epic in American history about African Americans. And so the little girl, she says, oh, okay, let me go to the library. So she goes to the local library, and of course she finds all the regular iconic legends like Dr. King, Malcolm X, and she says, but we already studied, these iconic figures. Anyway, when she's just about to leave the library, she sees a poster of a grandfather type with two children, and he's telling a story to. And then it dawns on the little girl, wow, my grandpa's always telling me stories about ancient Africa, about scientists, teachers, explorers, inventors. And so she decides to go to her grandfather's house. And what happens, Chris, when she goes to her grandfather's house, he unravels a story, a true story about her and her ancestors being Native American.
Now, I have to imagine in a major city, in a public school system, students of color are going to get some exposure to their history and some things to be proud of. But what's missing from that you're trying to fill in here?
Well, I think when you start to, I was an educator in BPS for 15 years, and one of the things, and I taught English language arts, one of the things that I felt was missing was not a whole lot of historical information that reflected the students who were sitting in the classrooms. And when you talk about, when you're a student and you're always hearing about other people, other ethnic groups, contributions and victories, it has something to do with self-esteem. So what I'm trying to do is increase that self-esteem for students to let them know it wasn't all doom and gloom back in the day. There were some historical victories that happened. As a matter of fact, part of my research, I ended up reading about the Seminole Native Americans, and they never gave up. And they won. They were victorious. So again, I think there's a lot of missing points or missing pieces when it comes to a holistic education to make sure that students of color, that they have that self-esteem, that they can walk in the classroom and say, hey, did you know what we did back in the day? And I think that is the missing piece, Chris, that I'm really interested in presenting.
Another missing piece, of course, is that you're going to have this young person sitting down with somebody older in the family, and some of this is going to directly involve the book, and some of it, I guess, will ripple out beyond that too, right?
Well, it certainly will, but the curriculum itself, I made sure that I was very careful in how I presented the curriculum. So we have 3 components. We have the storybook, because I wanted the students to have a wonderful reading experience without the other parts. I replicated the story. I don't want to confuse anyone, but I replicated the story in the curriculum so that the students would know how to read critically. And so if you look at the curriculum that I have, it has the curriculum, it has the story, the actual story, and then it has on the bottom, it has like dictionary terms, so that usually students, when they're reading, Chris, if they don't understand a word, it stops them from understanding what they're reading. So I made sure that the curriculum actually had a glossary of terms so that the young reader would understand what that particular word meant that they didn't understand. Then on the opposite page, I have a curriculum match. It's like a matching vocabulary so that they get more, it's reinforced in terms of understanding what that word is. And on the bottom, they have to write an original sentence. So it's divided into 3 sections. I have a pre-reading section, I have the actual story, and then the 3rd section, I have writing. So it's very comprehensive.
Finally, we should mention you have the signing event, the book signing
Oh,
event.
yes, I'm so excited.
And where should people go, and what time is it going to be?
Oh my goodness, it's going to be at the Grove Hall Library, Branch Library, and it's going to be Saturday morning, July 15th at 10 in the morning till 12 noon.
And of course, if people want to pop you an email and ask something, is there anything that
Oh,
they can
absolutely.
do with that? Yeah.
This is real easy. grandpupstories@gmail.com.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Chris, for having me.
Professor Deborah Shariff.